Kyle Boone of CBS Sports joins us now. Kyle, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing well. And you?
Doing well. Glad to have you on. Appreciate your time. And let's start off with we actually have the same number one team in the country here for a couple weeks in a row. And the way this
Wow.
college basketball season was going, I didn't know if we'd have that.
I know it's weird, right? We went through a spell there where it was basically as soon as a team got the number one ranking, they were taking a loss. And it wasn't just a loss. It was almost always to a team that they were heavily favored against. So we're finally getting some continuity with the sport. I feel like the teams at the top are starting to separate themselves a little bit. And, there was a narrative there for a few weeks or maybe even a few months where it felt like there are no elite teams in college basketball, right? Where every top team kept losing, and no team seemed to be separating. But Baylor is starting to look like it may be the best and most consistent team in the sport. Gonzaga played a little bit with fire over the past week, but they continue to win. Kansas looks like the best team in the Big 12. San Diego State can't stop losing. And so, yeah, we're finally getting, I think, some teams at the top separating themselves.
Real quick before we get to the SEC, I think you're right about Gonzaga. They've had some teams in the West Coast Conference really throw their best shot, and that's kind of the story every single year. They play a good non-conference. Then once they get into conference play, teams kind of play over their head when they play a team like Gonzaga, and it seems like they have to fight, which is probably good for them because their conference is a little weaker.
Yeah, I think that's true, and credit to Gonzaga because they are obviously the best team in the WCC every single year, and they know it, and so they know they're not going to be challenged as much in the conference, and so they challenge aggressively in the non-conference. They played Oregon, they played Michigan, and they went to the Bahamas and played Washington and Arizona and North Carolina. So they played a really complete schedule, and so far in the WCC, obviously they're 9-0. They haven't been beaten in conference play, but Santa Clara took them to the brink, and then Saturday they nearly lost. Playing a game that was streamed on Facebook, San Francisco and pushed them to the brink, and they ended up winning. But they're looking like one of the best teams on the West Coast, and that's no surprise.
It's kind of funny you mentioned the number two team in the country's game is televised on Facebook and not on TV because of them being in the West Coast Conference. All right, let's talk about the SEC. You talked about teams kind of going towards the top, starting to figure some things out. I think we're figuring it out in the SEC as well. You're seeing LSU still undefeated. Auburn at 6-2. They get a big win over the weekend against Kentucky at home. Kentucky's still going to be there, and they're 6-2 in the conference. And Mississippi State's a team that's played much better as of late. But obviously, we're here in Baton Rouge. Let's talk LSU because even though they sit there at 8-0, it seems like people are still waiting for this team to fail, and all they've done is win 10 games in a row.
Yeah, there's a lot of LSU hate, and I don't quite understand why that is. Will Wade deserves the credit that he's done with this team, and they're 8-0 in the SEC. They're 17-4 overall. It looks like they're going to be the favorite moving forward in the SEC, and I don't know if they're the best team in the conference, but they beat all the teams that have been ahead of them, and Auburn looks like they could make a push. Kentucky could make a push. But LSU is in a really good spot, and credit to them. Considering what they lost to the NBA draft, I did not think that they would be this good, this early, and this quick. But Will Wade has done an incredible coaching job in Baton Rouge, and he deserves praise. He's done a really good job this season.
Talking with Kyle Boone of CBS Sports. Kyle, where do you have kind of the SEC ranked right now as far as conference rankings? And does the league have a chance to move up? Because that's kind of been the knock on, maybe LSU in the conference this year. It's not as top heavy and not as ranked as high as it was a year ago.
Yeah, I think they've probably got to be top three. You look at the Big 12, and I think there's two legitimate national title contenders at Baylor and Kansas. You look at probably the Big East, it's pretty top-heavy as well. Seton Hall and Villanova, obviously they took a loss this weekend, but I think they could make a push for the Final Four. I think the SEC has got to be number three in that mix. You look at the top of the SEC, and it is really, really good. LSU's at the top there. You've got Auburn and Kentucky looming. You mentioned Mississippi State playing some really good basketball of late. And then Florida, the team that I thought would be the best team in the SEC this season. Obviously, they have not quite lived up to the expectations, But their ceiling, if they can put things together, I think they could be a team that could be a dark horse in March. And so, yeah, I think I would put the SEC at number 3 in the pecking order, and that is a bit of a surprise just because you look at some of the other conferences across the country, the Big East, the ACC. I think those are a little bit down overall, and the Pac-12 is obviously behind the pecking order. So SEC has, from top to bottom, they are really impressive this season.
I kind of want to know from you what you think the LSU ceiling is, because as we sit here and we see them, not lose an SEC road game in 2 years, and they're 8-0 this year in the conference, and obviously they got to go on the road to Auburn, they got to play Kentucky, they got to play Florida again, so we'll find out more about them. But they have some senior guys, they have some older guys on this team, which a lot of teams in their position don't have. What do you think the ceiling at the end of the day is for this LSU team?
LSU can win the national championship. I really believe that. And you look at teams in the past, and kind of the mixture of what they have in terms of roster construction, LSU checks a lot of boxes. They've got some really talented young players. Obviously, Trendon Wofford was a really highly touted freshman, and he's playing a lot better of late. They've got some seniors on this roster, some impressive veterans led by Skylar Mays, obviously. And the balance is really what impresses me the most. And, you look at Skylar Mays, Emmett Williams, Watford, Javonte Smart, Darius Days, they're all averaging double figures. So it's not like they're relying on any one player on any given night. They have a really balanced attack, and their offensive attack and the way they can score with any team in college basketball, they're going to be a tough out in March. I really believe they can win the national championship.
Cal Boone is our guest here from CBS Sports. We've talked about the SEC. We've talked kind of where LSU falls in that pecking order. And you mentioned, multiple title contenders maybe from the Big 12. When you see the SEC in tournament time, how many teams do you think total, though, could get in? Not just title contenders, but total teams maybe from the SEC that get into the big dance.
Yeah, that's tough right now. I would say LSU's in, obviously. I think Auburn, Kentucky, Mississippi State, Florida is in. Then it gets a little bit more dicey. South Carolina, I think, would be in right now. Arkansas, I think, would be in right now. And then that may be the cutoff. I think that Alabama or Tennessee might be in if they close well. So you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 teams in the NCAA tournament. I think that would be pretty solid overall. I think the SEC, the bottom of the SEC, is still really impressive, but I think they could be kind of on the outside looking in at the end of the day.
I love Frank Martin in South Carolina. I think he's a hell of a basketball coach, but I know that the Gamecock fans have to be thinking each and every year, can we just win in the non-conference? Can we beat Boston University? Can we beat Stetson next season? Because then they get into the SEC and they roll off 3 games in a row like they've currently done, and they've actually won 5 of 6 in the SEC. But each and every year, the non-conference just catches up with South Carolina because it's not only losses, but it's ugly losses.
That's got to be absolutely maddening. You're right. And I think it's the sign of a good coach, right, that a team that maybe is playing over its head at the end of the season, maybe didn't start off well. And the team is obviously, South Carolina is getting better as this season goes along. You mentioned they've won 5 of their last 6. They lost to Auburn in between there, but, they've beaten some really good teams. They won on the road at Arkansas. They won on the road at Texas A&M. They beat Kentucky at home. And so, I think they could be an NCAA tournament team, and they're playing some really good basketball of late, obviously getting better as the season goes along. But, yeah, looking back, I guarantee you Frank Martin is wishing he had that Boston game back or even that Wichita State game back because those would have been 2 really, really good, important wins on that resume, and that loss to Boston is really going to sting.
Cal Boone, you're the man. I appreciate your time here on a Monday afternoon, my man.
Yep. Thanks for having me on, guys.
All right, there he is, Cal Boone of CBS Sports. It's good, man. When you hear a national guy say this LSU basketball team, I mean, the ceiling is a national championship because sometimes you get in your bubble,
right? And
LSU's 8-0, they've won 10 in a row. But as a fan, and let's be honest, we're all fans of LSU here on this station. You're like, the East Tennessee State game. That's always in the back of your mind. But no, when you take a step back and you look at it, this team has got a roster. Now, it's not a very deep roster, but they're going to get some guys back from injury, and hopefully it deepens their bench a little bit. But this is a team, when you have the starting 5 and really the 6 with Marlon Taylor included that they play, I mean, they can go blow for blow with anybody.
I was surprised to hear Kyle Boone say that he thought the SEC was the third best conference overall.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's ahead of the ACC. That's ahead of the Big Ten. And so, whether he's right or wrong, that's his opinion. That bodes well for LSU when it comes to seeding purposes at the end of the year.